The most famous of all the statements Jesus made while hanging on the cross is a statement that seems to bring finality. It's the statement that makes you think that everything is done, everything is handled, it's all completed. In the book of John, chapter 19, he records 3 words that Jesus utters while literally hanging on a cross, hanging there carrying the sin of all humanity for all time upon him. And he offers these words that are probably the most famous words that he said while hanging on a cross. 3 words recorded in the book of John, chapter 19, verse 30. It says that Jesus cried out in this loud voice, and he utters this phrase. He says, "It is finished." Again, of all the statements Jesus makes while hanging on the cross, this statement is probably the one you know. This statement's probably the one you're familiar with. Maybe you aren't familiar with some of the other statements he stated. Maybe if you joined us in previous weeks or you jump on YouTube and watch some of the other sermons in this Gold from Golgotha series, you will find some statements you weren't familiar with, weren't aware of. But this is the one that makes sense. This is the one that you probably had some recollection of when Jesus cries out, "It is finished." Now, what I need you to know is this was not some last gasp, last exclamation from a cross from a dying man. No, this is a declaration that what needed to be done was now done. It was not the, "I'm so tired, I'm so weak, I'm giving up of myself." This is fully God, fully man, hanging on a cross that he had the power within him to pull himself off of, but yet he had purpose that was bigger than his power. And now he restrained himself and said, "What I came to do, it is finished." Now, some may say, that is a goat move. Are you familiar with this expression? Like, do you know what a goat is? Maybe for a second I need to open up the Urban Dictionary for you and just define it for you. The goat is the greatest of all time. It's an acrostic. People use it all the time and they talk about the GOAT in different things, don't they? If you're like me and you love basketball, you love the NBA, there's a lot of GOAT conversation when it comes to who is the greatest player of all time, right? And there are some people, maybe because of their age, maybe because of when they watched a lot of the NBA, maybe because they sincerely think it and believe it, and they say, Michael Jordan is the GOAT. He's the greatest basketball player of all time. In fact, if you think Jordan is the GOAT, why don't you just right now in a chat go ahead and, Team MJ, Air Jordan, whatever, let us know that that's what team you're on. Because there's a lot of people, and they have very good reason to believe with his 6 championships and all that he did, and took a little time off to go play baseball, took some more time off, he is the GOAT. And then there are a lot of people today, especially a little younger, maybe who never saw Jordan. Jordan just existed on YouTube, that they think LeBron is the GOAT. I mean, LeBron's unbelievable. Here he is in his 17th season and everything going on. They got one of the best records in the league. He could have won MVP about 58,000 times, every year. He doesn't necessarily win it, but he could win it. He's unbelievable. He's going to retire with being one of the highest scorers, highest rebounders, highest assist guys, minutes guys in NBA history. Went to 8 straight NBA. It's unbelievable what he's done. And a lot of people will say LeBron's the GOAT. If you're Team LeBron, let us know. Team LeBron, let's go. King James, what it do? let us know. Some people are Team LeBron. Some people are Team Jordan. They say Jordan is the GOAT. LeBron is the GOAT. Some people just try to be a contrarian and talk about people that ain't nobody seen play live. People talk about Wilt Chamberlain is the GOAT, and he might be. I mean, my goodness, if you look at his stats are unreal. Man averaged 50 points a game one season. It's mind-blowing. Maybe he is the GOAT. There's a lot of discussion about who is the greatest of all time. Now, maybe you're not a sports person. Maybe movies are more your thing, right? And you watched Tiger King and you got opinions on all this and you're a movie buff and you have movies that you think this movie is the greatest of all time. I got to be honest. I don't know movies that much. I mean, one of my favorite movies is Ocean's 11, which ain't about to win any award, but I just think it's fun and great. I like Remember the Titans, left side, strong side. Like, those are my kind of movies. The thing is this, you may have a movie you think this is the greatest of all time. If you got one, drop it down. People will probably talk about it. Some people like to get into serious debates right now about what is the greatest of all time when it comes to ice creams. I don't know about you, but this safer at home has made me craving the ice cream, like all the time. I don't even want ice cream that much until right now. And right now, all I want is ice cream. The only thing I want every day of my life is ice cream. And I'll tell you this, if you're wondering what the greatest ice cream of all time is, it is not chocolate, and it is not vanilla, it is not strawberry or orange sherbet. It is fish food. Little ice cream made by Ben & Jerry's, and it's fish, not with an F, but with a PH. It is fish food, and it is the greatest ice cream of all time. It is the GOAT. Now, some of you thought I forgot about Jesus. No, I'm trying to help you lean into Jesus for a second, because Jesus didn't just hang on a cross and make a GOAT statement. He literally was the GOAT. You see, it's through his sacrifice. It is through his death. It is through his blood that covers our sin that anyone is able to be made right with God. When he declared it is finished, it wasn't just a GOAT kind of statement. It was literally he was the GOAT. Because when he died, when he sacrificed his life and declared that it is finished, he made it possible for you and for me to be made right with God, for our sin to be covered, not partially, but completely. That it wouldn't be something that was just temporary, but it would be eternal, that we could be made right with God. Not just for some people, not just for good people, not just for Jewish people, but for all people. You see, Jesus laid down his life so that new life could be possible for you and be possible for me through the blood that came out of him from that cross.
And it reaches to the highest mountain.
finished. That's the statement Jesus made. In this fifth installment, that's the phrase that we're looking at together. It is finished. That leads to a very good question. What is finished? What was it that needed to be done? See, Jesus is clearly indicating here that something has come to a close, that something has been handled, that the way something had been done is now finished. But what? Because whatever was going on must have been a significant deal, because one of the last statements to come out of Jesus hanging on a cross was to declare that it is finished. But what is finished? Do we understand? Do we even know what actually got finished? A couple of years ago, I was working on this big video project for church. And it was for this particular event, and it was super involved. It was this massive, 15-minute video that went from video to live, had lighting all over the place that coordinated with it, people walking in, saying and singing stuff, live music, all this stuff working in and out. And it took weeks and weeks and weeks to pull off. It was a lot of coordination. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of figuring out. And I remember a couple days before the moment when we'd be able to share this with people, coming home and seeing my wife, Mindy, and telling her, guess what? It's finally done. I'm so glad it is finally finished. That project is done. And I remember her looking at me going oh, that's nice. And the reason it was just not a big deal to her is she had no idea the work that went into it. She had no idea how hard it was. She had no idea all the coordination and all the stuff that had to come together to make this thing happen. And so when I say it's finished, I'm yes. And she's eh. I think that's exactly how a lot of us respond when we hear Jesus declare it is finished. Because we have no idea what actually is finished. We hear it, it's great, it's Easter, it's Palm Sunday, it's Jesus, it's Golgotha, it is finished. Yes, that's one of his statements, that's great. But we don't actually know what is finished. We don't actually know what he means. You see, when Jesus said that it is finished, what he's talking about is he's talking about the penalty and the price for our sin, your sin, my sin, the sin of all humanity for all time, that it has been paid in full. It's been paid in full. In that moment, the way that Jewish believers understood this was that Jesus was making atonement for their sin. That this is what Jesus brought. He brought an atonement for our sin, which maybe means something to you. Maybe it doesn't at all. Maybe you don't even recognize that your sin has a price tag attached to it that needs to be paid in full. But what they understood, and maybe we do to a certain degree, is that our sin, the price of it, has been paid because of what Jesus did on the cross, because of his blood, because of his sacrifice. It has been paid in full. You see, the Hebrew religious system in the day of Jesus really revolved around this calendar of feasts and festivals. The Hebrew word for that is mikra. And mikra literally is translated festival. But it's also translated as rehearsal. It's almost like these feasts and festivals, there were 7 of them, were rehearsals for something to come later. Now, of all of these feasts and festivals, the most significant one, the most important one, was a day known as, and here's our word again, the Day of Atonement. Now track with me for a second. Let me teach, because I'm about to make sense of stuff that's never made sense to you here in about the next 7 minutes. The most significant of them was this day called the Day of Atonement. And what happened on the Day of the Atonement was so holy and so important, because it's literally when all of your sin, all of your junk, all the mess that you had done wrong would be paid for a year. It would be handled for a year. In fact, that's the way the Bible actually says this. I didn't make this up. The scriptures say it. It's just that part of the scripture that a lot of people skip over, even if they tell you they've read the Bible. They say they read the Bible, but they skip over some book called Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 16, here's the way the scripture records how this would go down. In Leviticus 16, it says in verse 8 that after Aaron was the high priest, he was the most important religious leader at the time. It says, after Aaron cast lots for the 2 goats, one for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat, he shall present the goat chosen by lot for the Lord and sacrifice it as a sin offering. But the goat chosen by lot as the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement by sending it into the wilderness as the scapegoat. Every year, the Day of Atonement would come about, and what would happen is your sin would literally be placed on the head of a goat. Now, if that sounds strange to you, guess what? It sounds strange to me too. But that is how it happened. That is the system that operated at the time. That if you were going to be right with God, if you were going to have your sin forgiven, if you were going to have all your junk handled, then the Day of Atonement was significant. In fact, all of Leviticus chapter 16 talks about the Day of Atonement. The first several verses before what we read talked about how Aaron, or whomever might be the high priest at the time, had to get ready, because this high priest was very involved in your and my and whomever sin was going to be put on the go. Very involved there. So there was a lot of cleansing and a whole lot of hand washing. He would have fit right in with all of our cleanliness right now. You know what I'm saying? Like he would have understood this. And all those first 7 verses talk about him getting ready, because the last thing you need is to put your sin on the goat and the high priest to be all kind of, And so the high priest had to get right. But then it tells us that there were these goats. One was offered as a sin offering. The other one was a scapegoat. And every year, people would live in tension, wondering whether or not they were right with God, based on what would happen in this moment, based on this high priest, and based on this goat, and based on them somehow coming together on this one day, this one moment, that somehow I've prayed and somehow this is gonna be handled. But it's interesting though. It's like they kept putting their sin on something, trusting it to someone who was incapable of handling their sin for good. Is only handled for a year. And next year, here comes the Day of Atonement. Everybody get your act in order. Let's do what we need to do. Because literally the word atonement, if you're wondering, what does that actually mean? Like I know, because I know English, but what does it mean? It literally means to cover over. That's what happens in atonement. The picture here is the picture of your sin being covered. And so what would happen every year on that day, if everything was done right, you could trust then that for the next year that your sin was covered because of the high priest, because of your involvement, and because of the goat. In fact, in Leviticus 16, you go down a few more verses and we get even more detail on how this went down. It says that the high priest is supposed to lay both hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all of the iniquities and rebellious acts of the Israelites in regards to their sins. You want to talk about must-see TV. I mean, picture this. The high priest has the goat here, the scapegoat, and he places his hands on the head of the goat, and people come one after another in a line as far as you can see. And here comes Sally. Sally, what's your sin? And she talks about what she had been perusing on the internet. And she talks about how she had been gossiping. And she has to say all this stuff. And the high priest has to state these things and put it on the head of the goat. And then Sally goes back to the house, and here comes Jarvis. And Jarvis does the same thing. And then Jarvis goes back to the house, and then here comes Fred. And then here comes Thelma. And here comes everybody. And I'm putting the sin of these people on the head of the goat. That's what's going on here. I mean, it's must-see TV. You want junk on your neighbor, just tune in on the Day of Atonement. It says he's to put them on the goat's head and then send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a man appointed to the task. The goat will carry on itself all of their iniquities into a solitary place, and the man will release it into the wilderness. They took sin very seriously. I mean, this day, there's so much ancient reading. There's so much present reading. If you lean into Jewish culture even today, of people who take the Day of Atonement very seriously, because this was their one shot to be right for the next temporary period of time, the next year. And so confessing all of your sin so it goes on the head of the goat was a serious thing. They took sin very seriously, so much so that they believed that the sin of people actually sat on the head of the goat. So much so that historians who were writing about this time at that time actually tell us that this man who would be appointed to the task, do you remember seeing that in Leviticus 16, verse 22? I read it a second ago. This man appointed to the task was always a Gentile, because these were Jewish people. This was a nationality thing as well as a religious thing. That these Jews would always have a Gentile be the one appointed to the task, to be the person who would lead this goat out into the wilderness. Why? Because if you're a Jew, the last thing you want is this goat that has the sin of everybody. It has your sin, everybody else's sin, your cousins and friends and people you don't even like, all their sin on its head. Last thing you want is for it to touch you, because now its sin will be on you. So they always had a Gentile do this, which is interesting, because when Jesus is falsely arrested and tried and sent out to be crucified, he is led outside of the city of Jerusalem by Roman, or should I say Gentile, soldiers who were supposed to walk the Son of God, who are supposed to walk the goat to the place where he will carry the sin of all people on his shoulders. What was Jesus saying when he said, "It is finished"? He's clearly marking the end of something and the beginning of something. What he's saying is, I am the goat. I am your goat. I know you've been trying to somehow be right with God. I know you've been trying to have your sin handled in all these man-made ways. I know you've been trying to be right with God by confessing and doing all these things. And these things, they give you temporary coverage. I have come to cover your sin and to cover it for good. Because Jesus is saying, I am the goat. I am the one who's laying down my life so that the coverage that you now take on is coverage for good. It is coverage that will never run out. He said, I am the goat. He's saying the system is finished. He's saying you trying to make yourself right with God in your own power and through the high priest and through the goat and through some religious people and all your good deeds, it is finished. Here is the problem, and lean into me right now. I know some of you don't necessarily like the teaching of the Bible and the study of things. Let me bring it up into your neighborhood. Let me bring it into your living room. Let me bring it into your easy chair right now. The problem is you may not even be Jewish, but you try to cover your sin your own way. Oh, it may not be about the Day of Atonement, and it may not be about necessarily a physical goat. It may not be about these things, but you try to cover your sin. You have a scapegoat you've created in your own mind and your own heart that you think makes you right with God. Some of you think it's your goodness. You think because you don't drink or chew or run with folk who do, because you do enough good and nice and proper and seemingly holy things that somehow your goodness covers your sin. No, it doesn't. But we trick ourselves into thinking I can put my sin on my goodness. Some of us, we think we can put it on our effort. We try to come to God and say, God, I serve so much, and God, I help so much, and God, I give so much, and I did this for this nonprofit, and I helped these people out, and I served over here, and I did this for the church, and I gave this money, and all of this effort, and somehow we think our effort is going to make us right with God, that our effort is going to cover our sin, and it does not. It is a false, misleading, at best temporary cover. Because the truth is, the only thing that can cover your sin for good, the only thing that can cover my sin for good, is what Jesus did on the cross when he laid down his life as the once and for all goat for all mankind. That is the goat move. Some of us, we try to use as our scapegoat our benevolence and our caring for people in need. Some of us, we try to put it on our money. Some of us, we try to put it on somebody else's faith. We try to talk about how grandmama was a praying grandma, and my aunt pastors a church, and my cousin loves Jesus, and my mom went to church, and all this kind of stuff. And somehow that their faith is going to make us right with God. And we think that is what's going to cover our sin. It does not. It cannot. The only thing that can cover our sin, the only thing that can make us right with God, is what Jesus provided on the cross. When he said, it is finished, he said, you don't have to try to do it in your own power anymore. When Jesus said, it is finished, he said, you don't have to try to do this in your own strength anymore. When Jesus said, it is finished, he said, I am taking your sin and all sin on me once and for all. What am I telling you? Stop trying to handle your sin for now and let Jesus handle your sin for good. Stop trying to handle your sin for right now, for this moment, for this day, for the next few weeks, feeling good like you've somehow done something to earn. Stop it. Stop trying to handle your sin for now and let Jesus handle your sin for good. Let him cover for good. See, Paul, later on after Jesus died, would actually offer these words in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 5. He said that God made the one who did not know sin to be sin for us, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Can I tell you something today that I hope will register on the inside of you like it's never registered before? That Jesus was sin for us, so that when he said, it is finished, then you handling sin your way is finished. It's not about how good you are. It's about believing in the goodness of Jesus. It's not about you being able to cover your sin. It's about believing that Jesus, in what he did, when he said it's finished, that he provided a way for your sin to be covered, for your sin to be atoned for once and for all. The ultimate goat move. That this is now handled. This is now done to anyone, to everyone, for everyone who would believe. Can I tell you something today? Jesus is available for you. You may be watching right now and you don't have a faith in Jesus. You've never allowed him to atone. You've never allowed him to cover your sin for good. To be honest, you didn't even necessarily think of yourself as someone who is sinful. The scripture tells us we all have sinned. It's something we forget a lot, but it tells us that we all have sinned. And what Jesus has done is made it possible for your sin to be covered for good. Some of you are watching me though, and you have a faith in Jesus on some level. But the truth is you probably have more faith in yourself than you do in Jesus. You don't necessarily think of him as the GOAT, as the one who did it all, who carried it all. You still hang some things on your own self-righteousness. You still hang a lot of things on your own goodness, your own perceived figuring stuff out and making stuff well on your own. Can I tell you something today? Jesus really did pay it all. When he said it is finished, what he meant was that your striving, your work, your effort, that it is finished. That you having to live in limbo of wondering whether or not I'm right with God. Did the spiritual man, did the process we went through, did that handle it? That was only ever a temporary covering. Jesus covers for good. Today, Jesus is available for you. Today, forgiveness is available to you. Not because you're a good person, but because Jesus has made it possible for us all. So right now, I want to pray for you. And if you're watching me right now and you need to receive forgiveness, would you pray this with me? Would you say, Jesus, today, I receive your forgiveness. I want you to cover my sin for good. I believe that you died for me, and I believe that forgiveness is available for me today. Jesus, thank you for saving me. I will follow you from this day forward. In your precious name, amen.